This is Joel Kotkin.
And this is Marshall Toplansky.
And you're listening to the Feudal Future podcast. Our society is being rapidly reduced to a feudal state, a process now being exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of small businesses are near extinction. Millions more are losing their jobs, and many others will be stuck in the status of propertyless serfs. The big winners have been the expert class of the clerisy, and most of all, the tech oligarchs, who benefit as people rely more on algorithms than human relationships.
With this, around the world, the middle class is becoming more squeezed than ever, and it's having profound economic, social, and spiritual implications. Here on the show, we're having conversations with business, government, and citizen leaders like you to get to the core of these issues and explore how we can work together to form a better future than the one we're headed towards. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Feudal Future podcast. I'm Marshall Toplansky.
I'm Joel Kotkin.
And today we are delighted to have with us three experts on the topic of how the workplace is changing, how remote work is affecting and will affect people across the world. So our first guest is Doug Holte, former CEO of the Irvine Company's office division. Kate Lister is president of Global Workplace Analytics, which is a research and consulting firm that examines and studies how the workplace is changing. And Andrew Segal is CEO of the Houston-based property management firm, Boxer Properties. Kate, Doug, and Andrew, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Let me start things off with this question or comment. We're hearing so much noise out there, so much is being written about the changing nature of work and whether or not we're going to be seeing remote work as the predominant mode of people's employment going forward. It's being positioned as a fundamental shift in consumer behavior as a result of COVID. What do you make of that? Is that, in your mind, is that what's going to happen? Is it something that's just temporary? How do you feel about it? And what information do you use to form your opinions about this?
Well, one thing I'd like to bring up is before we even start, we need to define the terms, because there are two. When people say remote work, half the people are talking about working from their homes and half the people are talking about a distributed workforce that may be working from an office environment. And these two issues are extremely different.
I would also add, and many people are talking about work from anywhere, which is entirely different as well.
I'd add a humorous to Andrew and Kate's comments. I think it's somewhat humorous, maybe dark humor, that many old line, I'll call them 20th century landlords, are speaking about return to work as if no one's been working for the last 15 months. And what they mean is return to a physical office.
All right, fair enough. So we have multiple definitions of it. And some of this, just to kind of riff off of Doug's point, sounds to me that there may be a little paranoia baked in among property owners and property managers about whether or not they're actually going to have a livelihood ahead. Are we looking at a highly paranoid environment?
Well, I'll go ahead, Andrew.
Anyway, what I was going to do is I hate to be the definition person, but I would separate the world into urban commuter reliant offices and suburban offices where you could bring your car, because there is a massive divide going on in that world right now. With the word commute is kind of replacing the word COVID as the threat to offices. So if people can drive their car to a place and it's relatively near their house, it seems to be thriving. You know, we've in our suburban properties, we've added occupancy and ironically rental rate over this period. In urban downtown commuter related properties, it's a disaster, and I don't see an end to it.
And just to add a little bit on this, Wendell Cox has done the research, and we've also seen it in Australia, which is suburban office areas have recovered much faster than the urban core areas. And that seems to be happening virtually everywhere.
Yeah.
But when you say recovered, Joel, does that mean that people are actually going into the workplace?
Yes.
Is that your definition of recovered?
Yeah, Wendell's been doing the occupancies, and the occupancies in the suburban offices are much, much better. And I assume part of it may be that the suburban commute, if you commute and you live relatively close, a 15-minute drive is easy. Who wants to go back into the death march on the 91?
Yeah, but the point though that I started off with is really this question of, do people even want to go into an office at all? There was an article over the weekend in the Wall Street Journal that talked about the big benefit that companies can offer is never having to walk into an office again. Is that real? Is that hype? Kate, you probably have the best handle on this.
Yeah, I've got to jump on that. I've been pushing the remote work rock uphill for almost 2 decades, and now it's kind of chasing me down the other side. Who would have thought it would have taken a pandemic? But the numbers have not changed. Before COVID, about 85% of the workforce said they wanted to work from home at least some of the time, and right now, about 85% of the workforce says they want to work from home at least some of the time, at least 1 day a week, actually. And the average is about 2.5 days a week in the US, about two days elsewhere. So that hasn't changed. What's changed is now because of talent shortages, people feel like they can ask for it. And that maybe they wanted to somewhat before, but now that they've seen it, boy, I mean, it's just changed their mindset entirely. It remains to be seen whether they're going to hold good on their threat. I've heard anywhere from 35 to 55% of the workforce says they would quit if they didn't get workplace flexibility. Will they? I don't know. It remains to be seen. But in any event, the genie's out of the bottle, and we are going to see a great deal more remote work. We've been plodding along for more than a decade at 10% growth a year, and we're still only at less than 5% prior to the pandemic that did it half-time or more. So my own prediction is we're going to see about 25 to 30% of the workforce working from home at least 1 or 2 days a week by the end of next year.
Doug and Andrew, is that consistent with what you're thinking?
I totally disagree. I think that if you ask 85% of the people whether they want to work less hours and get paid the same, they would also say yes. The productivity, unless it's like piecework, like if you have someone answering a phone at an airline and they're just taking a certain amount of calls, or maybe someone who's writing a story and they either write the story or don't write the story. But look, the productivity is massively decreased. And if you look at companies' financials, they do not have the margin to have their people work 10% or 15% less. It's virtually impossible to onboard people. So yes, it's what they want, but companies will not be able to compete without people in an office environment. That said, the office environment could be distributed. There could be 5 offices instead of a headquarters, but sitting home with your cat and your dog and your refrigerator and your spouse and your children, it's just not competitive. And people are empirically doing less work.
I beg to differ. What studies are you looking at that says productivity's down? Every single study I've seen says that productivity has increased. People are actually working more hours. They give back half of the time they would have otherwise spent commuting, and they're less distracted 35 minutes a day. Even with the cacophony of work at home under these circumstances.
So if they're working more hours, many of them are violating the labor laws, which is a whole other thing that we're going to get. In other words, if someone is an hourly employee and they're answering an email at 7 a.m. and they're answering an email at 7 p.m., look for them in court. It just doesn't work with this increase in number of people who are considered that. And we have a very central system where we can see what tasks people are doing when they're looking at things, and there's a empirical degradation in the amount of time that they're spending working on things. We're seeing it, and we're also seeing it's very hard to, I've found, and this is just my own experience, not a study, very hard to do business with someone where everyone's scattered, to get them all in the same place and get something.
Can I suggest a third way for discussion and get Kate and Andrew to continue the dialogue or maybe debate? It strikes me, having been freed of a portfolio, a day-to-day portfolio, when I left a large-scale platform 6 months ago, because I had a sense that the work week had an opportunity to be substantially redesigned in a much smarter way. I'm not sure that we have to choose between all remote, all in the office, or even what a year or 10 years from now will play out to. The question for all of us, I guess, is, isn't this a design opportunity to redesign a very inefficient and really unintelligent 20th century business model for work, which is that we all have to come to a factory all days of the week in order to get any important work done? I'm not sure it has to be an either or. There are some companies, and Kate and Andrew, you have spoken to many, I'm sure, who are going to be effective with a meaningful amount of work by a meaningful portion of the workforce done in a remote manner, either mobile or in a place other than the HQ office. There are other companies, Andrew, as you say, that most of their work will be done best by people in teams physically interacting with better tools. But I'd be interested to hear from Kate and Andrew, what are you seeing and hearing from employers and users of workspace about their plans to be smarter with how they call people to a workplace when it matters, and how they give them better tools to get better work done when they're there?
I mean, people have always wanted to make this polar, the media in particular. It's either, you're all in the office or you're all not. That 2 to 3 day a week is the sweet spot where focus work can be done at home or in a third place, and collaboration and communication and social needs can be done at the office. I've got 4 active clients right now. One's a 65,000 person manufacturing company. One's a 3,500 person legal firm. One's a 3,000 person insurance company. And one is a 5,000 person technology company. And they're all going through this return to office conversation and trying to figure out how they're going to do it. Every single one of them is going to unassigned desks, from having assigned desks, and to hybrid. And all of my clients are doing it on a choice basis, employee choice basis. 2 of them have already gotten rid of one got rid of 3 buildings, one got rid of 3 floors. So they're redesigning those spaces and places of work, to your point, Doug, to make them more effective for the kind of work that's being done in them. So, rather than having a bunch of assigned seats, or rather than having, 20% me space and 20%, 80% me space and 20% we space, that's going to flip. And they're spending the money to do that. They're spending the money to add the technology tools, all of which will make people better workers regardless of where they are. I mean, we're already working everywhere and anywhere we were before the pandemic. And, whether you're 9 miles, 9 floors, or 9 time zones away, we're already working digitally. And so I think there's a lot of improvement to come as a result.
Let me ask you guys, to what degree is the desire to cut fixed costs and the potential promise of kind of dropping the amount of space that you have driving employers, as opposed to trying to fit in with what their employees are, wanting to do?
It's very much secondary right now. Before it goes in, it's a pendulum. And after the prior, not this last recession, but the prior recession, it was all about saving money. Right now, it is all about talent. Yeah, saving money is sort of in the background there. But for the most part, I would say that my clients are not really dramatically reducing space, because they're expanding from what was too tight to begin with in open offices. And they're, as I said, more collaborative, and more social space takes up more space per person. So, maybe for like a 50% remote work, they're reducing the space by 15, 20, 25%. And they're holding on to that space too, because, this is too soon to start redoing space. Unless you were really efficient to begin with. We don't know what people are actually going to do.
There's a fascinating unintended consequence of this that's happening very fast, is that once someone doesn't have to be in the headquarters in the thing, now we can have a long debate about whether they should work from home or from a remote office environment. I'm a big proponent of multiple office environments. But what's interesting is that now if someone can convince you that they don't have to be in the office to do their job, I'm going to tell them I'm going to hire someone overseas. So we, in our real estate company, we hired 250 full-time employees overseas. They're based in India, they're in Honduras, they're in Mexico City. Depends on whether they talk to customers or whether they have to make site visits every once in a while. And we're now hosting 150 people for other companies that are overseas. So when you say you don't have to be in the headquarters, you should thank the employee very much, send them to work on their resume, and cut your expenses, literally 70 to 90% by hiring somebody who's elsewhere. And as Doug said, an office is a factory, but luckily the import and export of keystrokes is so far totally unregulated, untaxed, and unimpeded by time. You're not subject to really the vagaries of doing business overseas.
Yeah, one of the things I'd add into that for Kate and Andrew to keep teasing out is it strikes many of us that we're in the midst of an incredible period of resetting bargains between all parties in all segments of the work week. So you have employers resetting their bargain with employees and vice versa. You have landlords and occupying rent-paying tenants resetting their bargain as to what the landlord's supposed to do and not do. You have, of course, cities trying to reset bargains as to how land is used to create a more mobile, efficient work week. It's chaos. And Kate, as you said, I'm fascinated by how the employer occupiers are going to have to sort out over some period of time a new model, and it won't be one model, or I should say new models. And then, as Andrew said, the bargain may have some secondary consequences that employees didn't count on, which means if it's that distributable, your work, then it can go anywhere geographically, or it can be done frighteningly by machines. So we have to be aware of secondary consequences.
Yeah, I'll add another one to that, I've got a client that used the phrase, it's easy to quit a keyboard, or it's easy to quit a monitor. So, if I can sit here and tomorrow be working for a different company, that may actually increase turnover. I also wonder if it gets to the point of being ubiquitous, does the benefit of it go away? Does the attraction and retention benefit go away in the longer term? I will also add, Doug, to that set of mysteries, the public transportation systems. We've got fear of taking public transportation, which I think fuels some of the return to suburban more quickly than the downtown centers. And then, of course, the collapse of the downtown centers and all that goes along with that.
I'd like to focus a little bit on this geography issue and the work I did, particularly in Arkansas and elsewhere. We're seeing the opening of offices and also remote work in places where that never went before. In other words, the need to be in Silicon Valley is not what it was. We're seeing, for instance, the fastest growth in California, which is losing population, is in the Sierra counties, in the outer areas. One of the big fights we have here in California is people are moving to the Inland Empire. The jobs are moving to the Inland Empire, and the state's trying to stop it. We have this insane policy where we're going to force concentration at the same time that all the geography and demographics are telling us it's going in the other direction. So what happens? Can the government fight this trend, or is it basically we're going to continue to have dispersion into unfamiliar places?
Well, California is one of the states that some companies, a number of companies, won't support work from anywhere. So you can work from any state except California, Colorado, states that have some of the most onerous tax obligations for employers. We're just coming out with a report with a tax lawyer to talk about all of the rat's nest of taxation and regulatory. I mean, the kinds of things that we never anticipated. California has a law that we have to reimburse employees for any expenses incurred that relate to work. And so now that's just being tested. This was in place for a long time, but now it means reimbursing their cell phones, reimbursing their cable, their internet. In some places, in other countries, they're actually having to reimburse the person for part of their mortgages. But that rat's nest is what I say is going to stop the work from anywhere. Particularly, I mean, the U.S. states are just crazy, and going to other countries just opens up a whole new Pandora's box. And my clients are saying, we've got enough to think about right now. People can live within a state that we are already operating, and then we'll think about the rest of it later.
You know, I'd like to explore a little bit about the area of the economic impact of having just fewer people in offices, whether it's a huge amount, a huge number, or whether it's a small number, or whether it ultimately adjusts. Seems to me that at the end of the day, there are going to be somewhat fewer people clustered in offices for at least for the next decade. What's the economic impact to communities on that? Is anybody thinking about that?
Andrew, you want to swing first? Boxer's going to be full. The other landlords are going to struggle, right? And,
no. You know what? Look, I think that downtown New York, San Francisco, Boston, Inner Loop, Chicago. I mean, these are real serious problems of getting people to travel well over an hour in some cases each way to work. I don't see how that comes back. I'm very concerned.
It's interesting, Andrew. I'm sorry, Andrew. I was in New York last week, and it was fascinating to talk to 5 landlords, peers of yours, and get 5 different answers ranging from all's well, shut up and come back to the office. It's the 20th century, isn't it? All the way over to those who are investing heavily in new technologies and flexible workplace platforms to participate in the distributed work week. And so there's certainly some who are in complete denial that the asteroid has hit, and that, simple math, Kate, if you have 20% of the workforce no longer needing an HQ office because of hot desking or other means, that's a decade of demand for office typically. And so you have a lost decade, which either is going to all be heaped on the worst 20% of landlords, and maybe that's capitalism at its best, right? Its most thorough burning out of the worst inventory, or maybe, Andrew, everyone in the portfolio business of office workspace is going to have to take a little hit or invest more capital to make the workplace even more remarkable to preserve your occupancy. It's going to be interesting.
Well, again, I love the position of the suburban buildings because they, by definition, cut the commute, and people can get in. Like cars now have become extremely entertaining. Like, you get in your car, you're listening to things, you're talking to people. So there's become a divide between sitting on a train and sitting in your car. Car is like a private jet, just kind of going down the highway in your controlled environment. So I'm seeing very high utilization across the country of suburban office buildings. There is another divide. I keep having these divides between large companies and small companies. The smaller the company, the more utilization they have in the office. The large companies haven't gotten there yet. But it's this urban core. Like, I just don't know what to do with downtown Los Angeles, and I could see the appeal of Orange County, at the same time from an office market.
Are we seeing the service economy around real estate hubs taking huge hits? The dry cleaners, the hot dog guy, the coffee shop, the whole kind of peripheral secondary ecosystem of services to people who would normally go into offices. Is that tubing? Where is that?
Yeah, it's taken a huge hit. I think were it not for some of the relief, those places would have been absolutely gone. But some of our employers in downtown areas are struggling now with, okay, if we're going to have a phased return to work, people want to come back to the office because they miss their colleagues, right? So they're going to come back to the office and there's going to be nobody around. It's going to be a ghost town. And then they're going to sit, on their computer and work by themselves. The coffee shop's not open. The caterer isn't running the cafeteria. The coffee bar isn't open because they don't have enough business in the building to support it. And now people are going to say, well, I came back, I wasted 30 minutes of my life or whatever for what? So there's that interim period between now and when people are willing to go back to, if they ever do, 100% occupancy, that, we're still going to have to get through.
Andrew, what are you guys doing? Because it strikes me from the outside watching your business, you guys have been so effective at delivering smart, straightforward, sort of simpler transactions and workspace. Are you guys having to invest a lot in workday conveniences to help get the workforce to come back? Or are you letting employers do that for themselves?
No, so I wish I could take credit for it, but the small tenant suburban office buildings are doing extraordinarily well. Massive positive absorption and movement in rates. Downtown, very, very challenging. But what we see as a longer term thing, and I guess this really predates the pandemic, is that there's a mashup of the genres, which we used to keep separate. Like someone was multifamily, or they were retail, or they were office, or they were industrial, or they were restaurant, or hospitality. So now we're seeing like people working in hotels. They go to a hotel, they're working in the lobby, where office buildings are going to have to serve food. It's going to be a must. Like you're going to have food on demand in places, and the management companies are going to have to learn how to cook. There's no question. We've done that, and it's been super fun. The common spaces that Kate was talking about, they're not just for a tenant; they're for a building. You have to think about these kind of interaction things. So it's just this mashup that we're gonna have to learn, and this may have accelerated that need. Is that a building can't rely on an external coffee shop to economically have to be in business. They better open their own. Otherwise, as Kate said, people won't feel like they want to come back.
Andrew, you told me you were working on something, whether it was in Dallas where you were doing this, maybe just so everyone could know a little bit about it.
Yeah, so we basically just, we looked at our hotels and we said, okay, it's really fun to work in a hotel. If you've never done it, like go spend a week in a hotel working, because you have room service and you have all this entertainment. So what we did is we introduced room service to a downtown Dallas office building as food on demand by our employees. Literally, you hit it on the app. I want a cup of coffee. I want some cut carrots. I want lunch. I want to take dinner home to my family. One of our employees, so we're on the inside of security, literally blows right past your reception desk into your office, puts the thing down and leaves, because it's all been dealt with on your app. That's the kind of service that I think people will value. And again, it's disruptive because Cushman & Wakefield doesn't have a catering arm yet, but they will.
Well, many of those, Kate, I'm curious whether you're providing advice to property owners as much as you are employers, occupiers of space. Because to your point, Andrew, the conversations I've had all over the country with landlords, they are totally unprepared. The transactional advisors, otherwise known as brokers, are totally resistant to the future. They'd like long leases with high commissions and let's go back to business. And the intermediaries that are trying to create solutions include a lot of third-party service-based platforms like the 2.0 versions of WeWork, Industrious, Convene, that are trying to move into that space and provide hospitality-like services, almost city center type services. But Kate, are you advising landlords on how? I mean, the business model is really ill-suited to this.
Yeah, I actually get a good bit of business and take a good bit of business to those folks, the JLLs, the Colliers, and the Cushmans. because they don't have so in their workplace advisory groups, which they've only really started in the last few years, now those groups are playing more of a role in advising the brokers, clients, of what they should be doing, what they should be anticipating. But to Andrew's point, food is like, it's right up there. if you give people free, especially free food, that's what a lot of companies are talking about in terms of bringing people back. But they're also talking about, and you mentioned it, Andrew, feeding the people that are working remotely. So if, wanting to have that parity, this is a huge concern with companies, that we create a population of haves and have-nots, and that people are not going to be promoted at the same level if they work remotely, and they're not going to get the same compensation. And they're very concerned about that. And so they're doing things like, well, if we have an on-site gym, what do we do for the people at home? If we have a cantina, then what do we do for the people at home? So they're thinking about that, delivering the meal at the end of the day, and they already were. But I think a few years down the road, tie that to smart cities, and then you've got Uber that shows up at the door to take the person home, or take them to the next meeting, or take them home from the meeting, and in the Uber is the dinner or whatever it is that they need. And to get the between here and there, that's the hard part, and that's where there's going to be a lot of organizations that get hurt.
Can we all admit that at least for salaried employees, it's going to be legislatively virtually impossible to have them work from home? Like, in other words, if you take the letter of the law in California, which you will be sued and it will be enforced, about breaks and about when you're on and when you're off and all of these things, like, how are we possibly going to do this?
Yeah, it's complicated, but the call center industry led the charge to remote work 15 years ago. I mean, we were still carrying pagers back then, and that's the pretty low end of the wage spectrum.
Fair enough, but they do control the calls that come in, so you know exactly when someone's on a call and when someone's not. I'm talking about this person in the accounting department who wakes up, answers a couple of emails at 7, takes their kids to school, does some work, shows the plumber around, and then, in other words, how do I enforce the laws of the great state of California in that environment?
Well, don't you think that the laws or the regulations are going to reflect or will change to reflect the new environment?
No.
Silly optimist.
Has that ever happened in the past?
It has, actually, in the trucking industry.
Sure.
If you live in one state and you live in another, you owe taxes in many cases to in both states even. But when they started to tax the truckers, because they went from state to state to state to state, they said, "Oh, okay, well, and they created new legislation around that." I think the same is possible, but we've got we've got cities, taxes and regulations, we've got state, we've got federal. We've got workers' comp. It's
a complicated environment. The question I have,
Marshall, I just want to bring up one point about California and this regulatory issue before we let it go, and that is, what's weird is it's kind of a religion. Like, for instance, Marshall and I are doing some research, working for somebody in the legislature about this, and they basically have laws where they're literally saying, if people work remotely or if they work at home, they're going to have more GHG. I mean, literally, they're trying to push everybody into downtown offices where they have to commute for long distances. They have this theory that they're going to take transit, but I don't know, after 50 years of failure, maybe somebody should wake up.
I think, Joel, you just managed to steer the conversation to religion and politics in the same sentence, which is very impressive.
Dinner.
Well, let me add economics on top of that, which is, everybody in the institutional money world has been using real estate investment as a way of kind of tweaking the yield curve for them, for funding things like pensions. Given the current state of real estate economics, especially commercial real estate economics, is there a potential crisis growing in terms of investments that are not going to have the same level of yield that has been projected in when the investments were made?
And that could be applied also to high-end residential, Andrew, as we've talked about, high rises in downtown Boston.
So there's
go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say there are two kinds of threats to commercial real estate. One is permanent, one is temporary. So if I'm in Chicago where there is no growth and the population is slowly declining, and I find that I don't need as much office space as I did last year, I am in serious trouble. If I'm in Houston, it's like a bad haircut. Like, in other words, there's 100,000 people coming in per year. If we're over officed, it's a matter of time rather than a systemic problem.
Yeah, I would only add to Andrew's point that I think we still have so many unknowns on top of unknowns. If folks figure out how to redesign with technology around technology and culture, bad news can be coming to even pretty good suburban properties if there's permanently diminished. I mean, it's sort of like, if you had landlines and then this arrived, your landline is never going to be back to what it was. And so I think we have a bit of an iPhone moment with respect to traditional office workspace. And I just would add, Andrew, that I think to Marshall's point, the net returns, truly net financial returns, net of not only recurring operating expenses, but recurring capital investment to keep buildings climate worthy, customer worthy, functional and relevant. I don't want Andrew to have to speak to this, but I worry quite a bit about disappointments from financial investors on the true net returns of office workplace products over the next decade.
Yeah, I do too. I testified before Congress when they were last July. They were trying to figure out, what are they going to do going forward? Are they going to allow remote work? And how much can they actually reduce space? And it is a big concern in government, not just federal government, but state government. I'm also working with the state of Washington on this issue. But
Kate, can I chime in on that really quickly? Because there's a digital leasing marketplace that I'll leave the name out because there's 3 of them competing for leadership in that category. It's a simple transactional market like Airbnb for short-term workspace. That one of them just signed a contract with the GSA to provide empowerment to the workforce, teams and individuals in the GSA to lease short-term workspace in distributed choices around the country. It's likely to lead to a substantial reduction in the GSA's footprint on traditional leased space. So sorry, I just wanted to chime in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, GSA took a building that was built for 2,500 people and had 4,000 people assigned to it by the time they renovated it because of the remote work addition and because of going to hoteling. They don't tend to have the prime properties in many places. In one of the states that I'm working with, they're looking at taking some government buildings and turning them into community places for, almost a community co-working center, particularly in places where there's difficulty with broadband. But, if you just take that big chunk of real estate and look at reducing it, I just can't think that it's going to hold its value in next year or the following year.
But again, if it's in areas where it will never be filled, it's a disaster. If it's in areas that are growing, like Texas, which may be growing 2% in the big cities per year, it's a matter of time. In other words, you just backfill it slowly, even if it's, even if it's being used differently.
Yeah.
This has been really great. I'd like to just leave you guys and get your response to this, because obviously this real estate, somebody's got to do something with it. Let's take Hudson Yards. I mean, to me, I thought
just there last Wednesday. Yeah.
I mean, to me, it was like, why are you building this when people are moving to the suburbs? When besides the fact that it's mind-bogglingly ugly. So what do we do with Hudson Yards? What's the future of Hudson Yards? How can it be repositioned? Or is it just going to become like one of those steel mills outside of Pittsburgh?
Well, not to mention shopping centers and malls.
Right.
It's not just the office buildings.
And
now, I would love
residential.
shopping center turned into a live, work, play community. So, you know, you've got all your food on the first floor and you're shopping, and you live on the second floor in these wonderful apartments, and the parking lots become playgrounds. And, you know, I don't know what the ROI is on that from a real estate perspective, but there are some models around the country that have done that.
Yeah, I think Manhattan has to just reposition itself as a suburb of Brooklyn and try and get the families back. You know, Hudson Yards is going to follow the playbook of the World Financial Center. Like it's not economically viable. I don't think that you can get that number of people to want to commute the distance that they would have to do to fill those buildings when they could go rent space in New Jersey near where they live, or God forbid move to Austin, which is what they seem to be doing. It's a big problem. There may be a pendulum swing 20 or 30 years from now. This has happened at Canary Wharf. It happened at the World Financial Center. It's happening at Hudson Yards right now, but it's not going to happen during my career.
Kate and Joel, you probably both know Joel Kotkin, who's been writing about this, Israeli writer, who's just saying that, to your point, Andrew, that Manhattan's going to have to reposition itself as a residential value proposition. And, you know, can life science save the day? I'm a little curious about that. I don't know how many more labs and beakers we can deliver to solve traditional office lack of demand. But yeah, Hudson Yards is deathly non-New York at the street level, you know, in terms of no vibrancy. So I don't know, hotel, office, and retail, we've just finished a 50-year run of building too much of all three. And not enough housing. So it's a challenge. I hate to be, there's a little bit of this. I think we're all probably experiencing an incredible period of human confirmation bias, where everybody's going to run to their group to try to, find data to support what they wish was true. So that's, whether it's government or private sector landlords. I tend to be optimistic. I'm a little bit dour right now about how we move through to solutions that are practical and real, and not just hopeful to return to a past that doesn't exist anymore.
Well, it does seem as though we're moving to some future. Whether it's a feudal future or not remains to be seen. But I'd like to thank all of you, Kate, Doug, and Andrew, for really a fantastic, lively discussion. And let's see how it all plays out. Hopefully we'll have you back in a year and we can go and take a look and see what actual changes happened in the world. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Marshall.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Bye, guys.